evening. Thank you so much for being with us. Lots of analysis and commentary is straight ahead on the program tonight. The former president is now in New York. He left Florida, leaving Mar-a-Lago today to New York ahead of him being arraigned tomorrow. Of course, there is a lot of historical aspects weighing in. This is the first time this has ever happened, the first time a former president of the United States has ever been indicted. So a lot of historical context there, but also the upcoming 2024 presidential campaign. What type of an impact could this ultimately have on this presidential campaign? You have what many people would believe the frontrunner being indicted tomorrow, and although in many respects it could help him amongst his own base, oftentimes when someone is, has a large, loyal fan base like the former president does, his supporters are willing to, as much as some people might not like to admit it, his supporters are usually willing to toe the line with what he says. Therefore, if Donald Trump, claims that he needs, donations in respect to this, to, fight, etc., the chances are he's probably going to get it, and he indeed has. He's received a large number of donations, as some of his most senior advisors have pointed out over the weekend on various social media platforms, which could say something about his, people, about his supporters. Why would you donate to someone who is about to be indicted? That's another topic. But when looking at what this means for the 2024 presidential race, the vast majority of other candidates in the campaign, of course, there's only really two other candidates, with one other one saying that he is in the race, but he hasn't officially declared it yet. Of course, you have Nikki Haley, the former governor of the state of South Carolina. You have small businessman Vivek Ramaswamy, who has declared. And then over the weekend, you have former Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson telling ABC News chief Washington correspondent Jonathan Karl that he will make an announcement as it relates to his presidential candidacy later this month in Arkansas. Now, Vivek Ramaswamy, as an example, coming out, defending the former president, saying that, yes, he is running against the former president, but that he still doesn't believe that this should happen. So the bottom line, a lot of reaction has been coming in on this, and over the course of this evening, we will have commentary and analysis on all of this for you to get the very latest ahead of the indictment of the former president tomorrow. All right, as I mentioned, a lot of reaction, commentary, and analysis is straight ahead on the program tonight, including from former federal prosecutor, legal analyst Glenn Kirschner, who is coming up in just moments. He is standing by. Also coming up on the show, a man who knows Donald Trump well, his former national campaign press secretary in 2016, who also served in the White House as his principal deputy press secretary. Plus a lot of political reaction on what this means politically for the 2024 presidential campaign that is coming up and fastly approaching. Presidential historians will be here to discuss the historical context of this and the historical significance, given that this has never happened before in American history. No other president, former president, has ever been indicted or have themselves in a situation of this nature before. That is all coming up on the program tonight. Stay with us. Let's discuss some of the latest as to what's happening now, some of the latest developments with Joel Rubin. He's a Democratic strategist and the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State. Thanks so much for making the time.
It's great to be with you, Wyatt. Thank you.
Let's just start out with what's happening on this front with the Trump indictment and everything that's happening. I'm wondering, what do you make of the security aspects of what's happening, the fact that New York has so much security now happening as it relates to this, and the fact that how unprecedented it is with the former president being indicted, getting fingerprinted, potentially a mugshot, etc. The fact that Secret Service is going to go with him into that, it's kind of unprecedented.
You're right. This is a first time in history of the United States to have a president or former president indicted, and it really is a shock to the system, to be honest. I don't think it's a surprise that Donald Trump would be the one, if there was to be one that would be indicted, that he would be the one to go first. But it's a sad day for the country to have our former commander-in-chief in a situation where he has taken actions that have caused him to be indicted by a jury of his peers. And the process for this is that a grand jury reviewed evidence provided by the district attorney of New York, and the grand jury, regular people, decided that this was enough to indict. So, from a security standpoint, to your question, there better not be any shenanigans. If there are more people who are going to go to jail, it's okay to protest if they have a legal permit to protest in the area near the courthouse. But if it gets a little out of control or goes in a direction that is not just a protest, people are going to end up getting arrested. And hopefully that's not what they're going to do. Let the process play out. This is a democracy. We have a rule of law. And Donald Trump will have his day in court now.
And what do you make of the various reaction coming from all ends of the political spectrum? Obviously, you have, some senior congressional Republicans like House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, who is accusing Alvin Bragg of, in some way, without any evidence, trying to interfere in the presidential election. You have some Democrats who are, not celebrating the indictment for the sake of the country and the implications of it, but celebrating the fact that with what he's done, he's now, seeing some repercussions from it. What do you make of all the different reaction?
Well, I think the reality is that nobody knows indictment, and so all of this is noise and politics, and that's what politicians do, is try to take whatever that situation is at that moment and use it to their political advantage. So for Leader McCarthy, Speaker McCarthy, that is, it's his advantage to rally the base to say Donald Trump is being persecuted, and for some Democratic folks, it would be, in their perspective, maybe a benefit as well to say that this is finally a demonstration of Donald Trump's guilt. In my view, this is a situation where nobody knows what's actually true, what's in the indictment, and what the charges will be. And the courtroom has to be a sacred place. It has to be a place where the rule of law is applied equally to all Americans. And let's just see what happens. My concern is when we see politicians attempting to influence what happens inside that courtroom. That's a no-no. That is crossing a line of how a democracy like ours should function. And so when Speaker McCarthy says that they will take actions to prevent or undermine or stop an elected state attorney general from doing his work through the rule of law, that is political interference, regardless of what he thinks the motivations are for Bragg. The 30 Americans, regular Americans who are on that grand jury, were not Democratic pundits choosing to go after Donald Trump. They were people looking at evidence provided by Alvin Bragg.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess a lot of the argument too, the counter argument from the Democratic Party and from Democrats is, Kevin McCarthy and these Republicans are kind of making the argument that Alvin Bragg shouldn't be the one making the decision. But I guess, a lot of people are saying that Kevin McCarthy doesn't really have any stronger of a mandate than Alvin Bragg does. They were both democratically elected. When looking at the different people that are involved in, this case and the different people that have played some sort of a role, moving forward, I guess, how do we ensure that after Tuesday, it doesn't just kind of go away and we don't just necessarily and Americans don't just necessarily allow Donald Trump to, use what happens on Tuesday for a campaign ad, so to speak?
Well, I think it will be interesting to see if Donald Trump wants to keep on reminding the American people about why he's being charged with the crimes he's being charged with, and going to the hush money payments to a woman who was a porn star with whom he had an affair, allegedly, but likely, quite frankly. Does he want to keep on reminding people, suburban women voters, about his infidelities? Is that really in his political interest? And I'd say even to Kevin McCarthy, is it in the speaker's interest and the Republicans' interest to put Alvin Bragg on the witness stand in a congressional hearing and have him say those words over and over again and lay out evidence, which of course he would not do because it's an ongoing investigation. And in the rule of law in the United States, we don't open up ongoing investigations for public political scrutiny. So I think Trump, he has a real difficult dynamic. How much does he want to run on it to potentially secure his base for the primary, yet understanding very full well that could make him toxic in a general election? Now, he may not care. He may, frankly, not really mind about the brand of the Republican Party or in the general election. That's another day kind of a fight for him. But for McCarthy and other Republican leaders, they must be petrified about this dynamic.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Joel Rubin, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, Democratic strategist, and political commentator. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Anytime, Wyatt. Thank you so much.
Let me go now to Doug Jones, a former U.S. Senator for the Democratic Party from the state of Alabama. Thanks so much for making the time. I suppose I just want to start out with the aspect of politicization around what's happening. Obviously, you have people like House Speaker Kevin McCarthy accusing Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg of in some way trying to interfere in the presidential election with this indictment, a claim that really doesn't have any evidence. I guess I'm just wondering what you make of these claims.
I think those are kind of absurd comments. If anybody is making this a political issue, it is the far right. It is Donald Trump. It is Kevin McCarthy, and it's all the far right supporters of the president. They're the ones that are making this political. They're the ones. Donald Trump is the one raising money off of this, not Alvin Bragg. And so we'll see. We have not seen the indictment at this point. We will see it presumably tomorrow, before or right after the arraignment. We'll see what the facts are and what the evidence is, and let people judge for themselves. But I think to jump to the conclusion, one way or another, that this is political, as opposed to just simply letting the process play out, Donald Trump is wrong. Donald Trump is the one that got himself into this, not Alvin Bragg and the politics.
And obviously, you served in the U.S. Senate largely in the lead up to January 6th, and to the lead up of kind of this vigorous new wing of the Republican Party that are always willing to essentially toe the line with what the former president says. I'm just, I guess, wondering what your reaction is to that, and how does that kind of relate to this?
Well, I think they're still being held hostage by the far right voters in their primary. They don't want to be primary. They don't want to have opposition within the Republican primaries. And so I think they're to some extent being held hostage by a small but very vocal faction of the Republican Party. And that's unfortunate, because I consider those folks to be enablers of this far right wing of the Republican Party. And I think people need to stand up more. They need, the Republican Party has traditionally been the party of the rule of law, conservative values, conservative rule of law, following the law, supporting law enforcement. And that this faction is anything but that right now. And I will tell you, White, I've also been both a prosecutor and a defense lawyer. And every time in this country that you see an investigation and or indictment of a public official, they scream politics. It is just the defense de jure, but it's never really a defense. The facts always speak for themselves. And ultimately, either a judge is going to rule on the law, and then a jury ultimately will rule on the facts of the law.
And obviously, Trump's campaign team, Trump himself, they have been talking about how over the course of this past little while since this indictment kind of came to light, the fact that Trump has received quite a large number of donations. From your perspective, I guess I'm wondering, how can that essentially almost be reversed to have the opposite effect, so to speak?
Well, first of all, I'm not surprised by that. When people are supporters of a public official, they don't want to believe that the folks that they have supported have committed any kind of crimes. I ran into that in my 2017 race against Roy Moore. People that supported him over the years did not want to believe the allegations against him. So they rallied around him, both with their votes and to some extent with their money. I think we're seeing that with Donald Trump. There is a lot of feeling in this country that this might be a politically motivated prosecution. I don't believe that, and I think the facts will bear out that that is not the case. But in the meantime, you're going to see Donald Trump and Republicans playing that for their own political advantage. The best that the Democrats can do right now is to talk about the fact that we have a system of criminal justice in this country, that people are innocent until proven guilty, that a grand jury, not Alvin Bragg, but a grand jury is the people that indicted Donald Trump, and he will go through the system like everybody else in his defense, and he's going to have good defense lawyers are going to present their defense to both a judge and a jury. And I think Democrats have to let that play out. I don't think that we can do anything other than allow the rule of law to play out in this country. We cannot celebrate the fact that Donald Trump has been charged. I think that is a mistake for Democrats to do that because, quite frankly, at the end of the day, the fact that you've got a former president in this position is not a good day for this country. It's not a good day at all. But the fact of the matter is, he's the one that put himself there, not Democrats.
Joining me now, former federal prosecutor and legal analyst Glenn Kirschner. Glenn, thanks so much for making the time.
Happy to be with you, Wyatt.
Let's just start out with some of the arguments that you repeatedly hear from Republicans as it relates to Alvin Bragg, the Manhattan District Attorney. You will repeatedly hear Republicans, say that this indictment is politically motivated. I guess when looking at that, how almost ridiculous, so to speak, is that argument, given that, it's an indictment of a former president of the United States? I mean, you would have to have fairly substantial evidence to back up your claims.
Yeah, and the good news about our system, I was a prosecutor for 30 years, and if there's something improper about this indictment, you can bet it will be addressed in court by the judge. Of course, political opponents will scream, this is all about politics, but it sure doesn't feel to me, to this old prosecutor, like it's all about politics. We don't know what the indictment includes yet. We will know that on Tuesday, but reportedly there are 30 counts. And we all know that the co-conspirator in this very series of crimes, Michael Cohen, pleaded guilty and went to prison. He committed the same crimes that Donald Trump committed, and he is actually a less culpable person, in my experience, because he committed these crimes for the benefit of Donald Trump. So this was a long time in the offing, and I'm glad for the American people that it looks like Donald Trump will now begin to be held accountable for some of his crimes.
And I mean, when looking at what you are personally expecting on Tuesday, I mean, many people I've spoken with say that they expect this to be the first of many indictments, given the various, things that he kind of has himself wrapped up in, so to speak. So when looking at Tuesday, when looking ahead, what are you expecting to see? And I guess, what are you expecting from, given the fact that, I mean, you have people repeatedly, again, I'll stick with Alvin Bragg, going after Alvin Bragg as an example, forgetting almost that the grand jury is the one who really makes the decision.
Yeah, so I'll be interested to see if there's a discussion about what kind of conditions should be set by the judge for Donald Trump pending trial. We know that Donald Trump is in the habit of posting things that are inflammatory, that are false, that have been known to incite imminent lawless action. And I actually think the prosecutor would be irresponsible if he or she didn't ask the judge to set some sort of conditions such that Donald Trump not be permitted to either say or post anything that is demonstrably false, that is inflammatory, that could incite violence against others. That's called a gag order. It's also called prior restraint on speech. And judges are generally not excited about the prospect of trying to restrain somebody's speech because there are First Amendment free speech implications when you do that. But, Donald Trump has already posted things that are untrue about the presiding judge, Judge Marchand. He just posted, "The judge hates me." Not true, certainly not provably true. He said, Alvin Bragg handpicked the judge. I can tell you, as a prosecutor for 30 years, that's not the way it works. These are random assignments. And he also said that Judge Marchand, quote, railroaded my chief financial officer, Alan Weisselberg, into pleading guilty by basically threatening him. Again, these things are untrue. It's misinformation. It's propaganda. And it could certainly poison the jury pool such that it would make it harder for the people of New York to get a fair trial. People need to remember that a defendant has a right to a fair trial, but the people, as represented by the prosecutor, also have a right to a fair trial. So I hope the judge takes these issues up on Tuesday.
And I guess touching on the first point that you mentioned with the gag order, essentially refusing him from being able to make any, comments, so to speak. I guess, I wonder then almost with all of the people that are close to him, it's not like his supporters just listen to him. They also listen to people who share Donald Trump's viewpoints, like, Matt Gaetz, Marjorie Taylor Greene, for example, just two examples. So I guess going forward by putting that in place, does it really do what, the intended purpose of it would be, given that all of these people essentially still take their orders from Donald Trump?
Sure. Donald Trump knows what he's doing. He's sending a message. He's sending a signal. The reality is he operates very much like a mob boss, and we have RICO laws to go after the mafia or other organized crime, other corrupt organizations, not just the mafia. The mafia boss ordinarily doesn't directly say, I want you to commit the following crime. He would say, I've had my eye on that guy over there, and it would be interesting if something happened to him. Well, he didn't expressly tell anybody to do anything to anyone, and yet the message is sent. Donald Trump operates in much the same way.
And just lastly, before we conclude, again, when looking at what's going to come on Tuesday, the fact that many people are saying it could be the first of many indictments, I guess how do we ensure that Tuesday isn't just an opportunity for political theater for Donald Trump to use it as a campaign ad, and moving forward, what is it going to mean, and how can, the various people involved in this ensure that what happens on Tuesday doesn't just happen on Tuesday and then everyone forgets about it?
So it's hard not to have everything Donald Trump is involved in morph into a campaign event. It likely will. There have already been reports that he earned, I think, more than $4 million in contributions after he was indicted, saying, I've been indicted, now send me money. He's had some of his operatives like Senator Lindsey Graham go on TV and in a very fearful plea to his supporters saying, and I quote, please send Donald Trump money, because he has to defend against these outrageous charges. So everything Donald Trump does is sort of a campaign event. And unfortunately, much of it also involves grifting, conning those who are still gullible enough to buy into what Donald Trump is selling. You would think after, 4 years, now almost 6 or 7 years since he was elected in 2016, when, you see how he performed, you see all of the violations of law, you see how he inspired an attack on the Capitol on January 6th to try to unlawfully retain the power of the presidency. You would think people would have learned their lesson, but he continues to receive largely sort of small dollar donations from the folks who are either incapable or unwilling to sort of see him for what he really is.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Former federal prosecutor, legal analyst Glenn Kirschner. Glenn, thanks so much for making the time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
I'm joined now by Hogan Gidley. He was the National Campaign Press Secretary for Donald Trump in the 2016 presidential election. He also served in the White House as the Principal Deputy Press Secretary, and he is with me now. Hogan, first of all, thank you very much for making the time. I appreciate it. I suppose let me just start out. Obviously, a lot of talk here is the fact that this is happening as Donald Trump is a candidate in the 2024 presidential race. A lot of people say it will help him. A lot of people say it might not. I guess I'm just wondering what you make of this in the respect of the 2024 race. What does it mean for the former president and for the other candidates involved?
Well, I think you can look at it in two ways. Into the segment that deals with the legality of it, and then the segment that deals with the politics of it. Legally, I'm no attorney, but I've listened to a lot of legal experts, people like Jonathan Turley, who said this was legally pathetic. Alan Dershowitz, noted Democrat, world-renowned attorney, said that a first-year law student could handle this case. They have nothing against the former president. Also, there are some problems, obviously, with the statute of limitations. The number one witness, the star witness, is a convicted felon, and Michael Cohen. The facts of the case just simply don't line up for a felony charge by any stretch of the imagination. Some would argue not even a misdemeanor for that matter. So there's some problems legally. But the question, I think, is about the political fallout. And right now, it looks like it's only a positive for Donald Trump. Now, it remains to be seen whether or not it'll be positive long term. But right now, what it does is it exposes kind of a weaponization, a politicization of the Justice Department and the justice system to go after an American citizen. We've seen that time and time again with someone like Donald Trump. They've gone after his friends, his family, his staff, his businesses, him personally. And every time they go after him, they lose the battle. And we saw that a bunch of times too. It was the Russia hoax, the impeachment 1 and 2, which were all fake as well, the document gate scandal, which is a joke, and then now this indictment. Every time they go after him, it doesn't quite work out the way they want it to from an actual victorious standpoint from the legality or the impeachment, as I mentioned. But it does do what it's designed to do, which is hurt him politically, hurt his reputation. And that to me is kind of the most egregious part of this. Like, for example, the ACLU loses a lot of its cases in court, but they don't file those cases to win. They file them to muddy up the system, to slow down the process of a particular law or something that's happening in Congress or at the state level too. So they're just trying to tarnish Donald Trump so that he is limping into a presidential race. He is limping through a primary process. But one other thing I think is important to point out is that so many in this country do believe this is a politically motivated attack. In fact, 62% of Americans believe that. 70% of independents believe it's politically motivated. And what it does, it highlights a two-tier justice system where the elites are protected, everyone else isn't. And I don't mean Democrat elites, by the way. I mean everyone, right, left, and center who are in that elite class. They tend to be protected. And it's the rest of us who tend to get targeted. That's the real problem here. And I think it exposes that fact.
And I guess I just want to get your reaction before we finish off here. There are a large number of Republicans, the majority of them currently in the field, who of the different candidates running, who have came to the defense of the former president. One example would be businessman Vivek Ramaswamy, who is a candidate for the job, who has come to the defense of the former president. But of course, it is, still some people who are considered as likely to enter the field who haven't really said anything. I guess I'm just wondering what your overall reaction is to the fact that some people have said stuff, other people have chosen to not say anything and remain silent. And what do you make of the reaction that we've seen from some of the other 2024 candidates running for president? Some of them have obviously come to the defense of the former president. But you have some potential candidates for president who haven't yet declared their candidacy, who haven't really said much.
Well, look, I think when Donald Trump's in the room or Donald Trump's on the ticket, he sucks all the oxygen out of that. He becomes the story. And you see that in the last couple of weeks with the political moves by Alvin Bragg to go after Donald Trump. And by the way, that's by his own admission. I'm not putting words in his mouth. That's what he said. But what it forces the other candidates to do is comment on this situation. And the ones who believe in Donald Trump's policies, they have to defend this president. Those who believe in the rule of law have to defend the president. The problem is for them politically is they're forced talking about somebody else instead of their own successes and Joe Biden's failures. They have to talk about Donald Trump, which is not something they want to do. A few of those candidates like Asa Hutchinson and others have come out against Donald Trump in that way, but that's not going to win them the nomination. There's no pathway for someone like that who continues to deride a former president like Donald Trump, who did so much for the Make America Great Again movement. And I'm not predisposed to disliking a candidate with 1 or 2%. My goodness, I worked for a man named Rick Santorum and a man named Mike Huckabee, both of whom no one ever heard of before until they ran for president, and they did really well, both finishing second in the Republican primary process. So it's the fact that Asa Hutchinson's at 1%, single digits, doesn't bother me. It's the fact that he's not where the base is. He's not where a majority of America is either. That's going to be a problem for him.
Okay, well, Alan Dershowitz, I want to go to him next. You hear him, talked about a lot on the right. He is, valued on the right wing. And I want to talk about some of the things that he says in this interview. I pre-taped the interview with him. When you are looking at what is happening here, there are people with different perspectives. Most certainly, it is reflected in this interview. Alan has, perspectives that are closely aligned with the former president. Absolutely. So just it is different than the perspectives of what you have heard from the majority of people. Responsible platforming is certainly important. So I spoke with him earlier, and here is that conversation. Joining me now is lawyer and attorney Alan Dershowitz. Thanks so much for making the time.
My pleasure. Congratulations on being such a young entrepreneur.
Let's just start out. I know you've said recently that you're looking to sue Michael Cohen. Talk to us a little bit about that. He's obviously the key witness in this most recent Trump indictment.
Well, as you may know, 8 years ago, I was accused by a woman I never met and never heard of having sex with her, and never had any contact at all. It was a total made up story. And eventually she acknowledged that she may have confused me with somebody else. And I've never done anything wrong sexually in my entire life. Never been in any way associated with underage people, never associated sexually with anybody related to Epstein. The only person I've had any sexual contact with since the day I met Jeffrey Epstein is my wife. And Michael Cohen decided, because he didn't like what I was saying about his credibility, to post a tweet suggesting that I had some improper contact with Epstein on, I think he put it, underage island or something like that, which is clearly defamatory. And so I've spoken to my lawyers about filing a lawsuit against him for defamation.
I guess just when looking at the timing of all of this, you said you criticized Michael Cohen, and then that's what he did in response to this. I guess, what do you say to people who are looking at the situation with the Trump indictment right now, and are looking at all of the different factors that are, weighing into that? I guess, what do you make of the Trump indictment and some of the people that are involved?
There's no doubt in my mind that if his name was not Donald Trump and this was not New York City, he would not be indicted for what apparently the indictment will accuse him of. We're not sure, but nobody previously in my 50 more years of experience doing this has ever been accused of a felony for misreporting a hush money payment. And the question is not only did he do something wrong or didn't he do anything wrong? There's a great cartoon that shows Donald Trump tearing the label off a mattress in 1997 or something. And of course, the mattress tag says tearing off this label is a violation of law. The issue is not, did he do anything that might conceivably give rise to criminal charges? The question is, would anybody else ever have been charged for doing the same thing? Or is this selective prosecution by a district attorney who ran for office as a Democrat on the promise of getting Trump, the man who's going to be running against the chief Democrat in the world, namely President Biden? So the question is one of selective prosecution. I think the case that this is selective is overwhelming.
And I mean, I guess the argument coming from a lot of people on that front, kind of the counter argument, is that as the district attorney, Elvin Bragg, the grand jury, who is the one making the ultimate decision here, I guess the argument really is that in order for them to do such a thing, they would obviously have to have a lot of basis to do so. But I've talked with lots of folks over the course of the last few days, and the argument that is repeatedly coming from them is that they believe that this might be the first in just many indictments for the former president. So I guess, when is enough ultimately enough, and how long is this sort of tolerated?
Well, first, I wrote a book called Get Trump. The title is not original with me. It's the campaign pledge that both the democratically elected district attorney and attorney general made when they ran for office. And this is a function of getting Trump. In the book, I go through each of the 4 charges that are currently being investigated, as far as we know, against him: the one in Atlanta, Georgia, the one in Florida, the one in Washington, D.C., and the weakest one in New York. I go through each of them and show that there's no legal basis. Look, I'm not a Trump supporter. I voted against Trump twice. I plan to vote against him a third time if he gets the nomination. This is all about my commitment to the rule of law and objective law enforcement. I've been defending people for half a century more. And these are positions I've taken over all these years. I haven't changed anything at all. I would do the same thing if this vendetta were directed against a Democrat. I did defend Bill Clinton. I defended Ted Kennedy. I defended Senator Alan Cranston. In fact, all the political people I've defended over my long career have been Democrats until now, and I'll continue to defend both Democrats and Republicans if I believe that they're subject to selective prosecution, getcha prosecution, unconstitutional prosecution, improper prosecution, unrighteous prosecutions, and this is all of those things.
So then I know you have to go, so just lastly before we conclude, when you're looking at this particular case with this indictment with Donald Trump, the hush money payment, and Stormy Daniels, I guess, what is the solution here? Because it seems as if a lot of people are just wanting it to go away, which also doesn't necessarily seem to be the answer, given the seriousness that, yes, he is still the former president of the United States, and yes, he does still have an obligation to hold up the rule of law.
Everybody has an obligation to hold up the rule of law. The issue is not that he's a former president. The issue is that he's a potentially future president. And this is an attempt to try to weaken his campaign for president. People are saying it's the first time a former president has been indicted. That's not the important issue. It's the first time a man running for president against the incumbent has been indicted. And you mentioned that the indictment was granted by a grand jury. No. A grand jury in New York is 23 chairs, empty chairs moved around by the prosecution. Grand jurors don't think, they just do what the prosecution wants them to do. As the chief judge, who ought to know, of the New York Court of Appeals put it many years ago, a prosecutor can get a grand jury to indict a ham sandwich. And so don't pay any attention or give any weight to the fact that the grand jury indicted him. The grand jury was intended to be a protection for the defense, but it now serves only as an aid to prosecutors. It is utterly irrelevant. I wish it could be abolished. It can't be abolished because it's in the Constitution of the United States and many states, but it should be reformed so that it performs its real function, that is to serve as a defense against overzealous prosecutors rather than an aid to overzealous prosecutors.
Okay, well, I want to go now to Michael Ricci. He was the director of communications to Larry Hogan when he served as Maryland's governor. And the interesting thing about this interview is that Larry Hogan was, regarded even by some Democrats as a more moderate and a more sensible Republican. So I wanted to get Mike's take on this because of the fact that he served alongside Governor Hogan and the fact that now Donald Trump, who is very much, the Republican, almost the leader, so to speak, of the Republican Party, I wanted to get his take on what this means for the Republican Party and moving forward. I spoke with him earlier in an interview, and here is that conversation. When looking at the various people who have come out and spoken out about the indictment of the former president, you have many people on the Republican side of things who are unhappy with the nature of how this has taken place. You have several Republicans criticizing the Manhattan District Attorney, Alvin Bragg, for various reasons. Some Republicans saying that he is too partisan. Let's discuss what we can make of this with Mike Ricci. He is the former director of communications to the former governor of Maryland, Larry Hogan. Thanks so much for making the time.
Happy to do it, Wyatt. Good to see you.
Yeah, you too. Let's just start out with, you were the director of communications to Larry Hogan, the governor of Maryland, the former governor of Maryland. He obviously, and the way that he governed, a lot of people saw him as a fairly sensible, moderate type of Republican, the type that you could have a conversation with, not someone who was super far right wing on the political spectrum. So I guess when looking at where those types of Republicans fall in terms of this indictment, you do have some of those types of Republicans who are still speaking out about this indictment. I guess, what do you make of all of the various types of Republicans and the way that they are reacting to this indictment?
Well, initially, there's probably a pretty small sample size of, you have Republicans, many of whom are what you'd call establishment Republicans, who have questions and concerns about this prosecution to the point that they're almost all rallying around the former president. And then for now, you'll have a smaller segment of Republicans like Governor Asa Hutchinson, who expressing, concern about the President Trump continuing to lead the party. So I think that will begin to diversify as we see the strength of the case and we see how things unfold politically. But clearly, by and large, a lot of Republicans have determined that the safest thing to do for now is to try to stay closer to the former president and his position and let things unfold from there.
And when looking, I guess, at what this could potentially mean for the 2024 race for the White House, a lot of people believe that this could actually help the former president, just given, the nature of some people were even saying that it would, allow him to almost kind of be the victim in this case. He could, go and, have a bunch of photos taken. He would have a lot of publicity by voluntarily turning himself in, as many people are suggesting. I guess, what are you personally expecting to take place on Tuesday? And what do you think what happens on Tuesday will ultimately mean for the campaign?
Well, it's interesting you phrase it that way, because the President Trump and his team are almost basically treating it like a campaign rollout in and of itself. They've continued to announce how much money they've raised the way you would for some major campaign event. They've already announced that he'll give some sort of speech on Tuesday night from Mar-a-Lago. Usually a high-profile person goes through something like this. They want things to be as quiet as possible, to be in and out, but they're treating it like a campaign event. And as such, it will absolutely suck the oxygen out of everything else politically, including, for now, the Republican primary. So in the short term, it will be all Trump all the time again, as it was before in a way. And how it unfolds from there, again, a lot of it will depend on the strength of the case and how the other cases that are pending against the former president unfold. But for now, it will absolutely feel, and his team will absolutely try to maximize it as a campaign event, but also, as we discussed previously, to try to freeze the rest of the field from going after him and, by extension, his supporters.
And I guess you mentioned that, his campaign team and those close to him are kind of coming out and how they're kind of, preaching about their various donation amounts that they've received. They're also coming out and suggesting that polls are increasingly in their favor. Why, in your opinion, amongst Republicans, would something like an indictment lead to increased donations and increased support?
There is a growing narrative in the Republican Party. It's communicated a lot through conservative media and Fox News about the key word is weaponization of the federal government, using the bureaucracy, whether it's the Justice Department, the FBI, or other federal agencies, against President Trump or against even just the American people. So for President Trump and his team, you're playing on an increasing narrative that has taken hold among Republicans. And so because they're able to sort of marry what's happening to him with this larger concern that they communicate on a daily basis in this ecosystem about, again, what they would call the weaponization of the government and the bureaucracy or the deep state, if you will. It's just a meeting of all these messages at this particular moment. And that's, I think, you're going to continue. And, you see the Speaker of the House, calling for investigations of the investigations. Again, it's all gonna continue to rattle around this ecosystem and continue to gain steam.
Okay, well, obviously there is a lot of historical aspects to this as well. This is the first time, as I've alluded to, ever that a former president has ever been indicted and to face a situation of this nature. So I wanted to get Lindsay Chervinsky's take on this. She is a presidential historian who I spoke with earlier, and here is that conversation. Obviously, there's a lot of historical context to what is happening as well. Donald Trump is the first president ever to be indicted, to face criminal charges. Let's go now to presidential historian Lindsay Chervinsky, who joins me now. Thanks so much for making the time. I appreciate it.
Of course, happy to join you.
So I guess I mentioned that in the introduction. How significant is it, the position that Donald Trump has essentially put himself in, being the first president to be indicted?
Well, I think that the word unprecedented has lost some of its meaning over the last 8 years because we've used it so much. But That doesn't mean that it's not true or that we shouldn't stop and pause and take a moment to reflect on the fact that it is actually unprecedented. And so it's a hugely historic moment. Now, of course, we always have to say innocent until proven guilty, but the fact that no indictment has ever occurred before suggests that we are in sort of uncharted territories, and what comes next for the institution will also have historic ramifications.
And I guess when you look at his response to what is happening, because oftentimes, when looking at what happens to a former president, if they lose after their first term, they'll kind of gracefully go on and they'll, kind of just enjoy their retirement, so to speak. But with Donald Trump, I guess it's quite different. You have someone who is now running again in 2024, who seems to use every kind of publicity tactic that he can use to kind of get out there and get his name out there, so to speak. I guess when looking at how significant that is, I mean, how often is it that someone is in these types of circumstances?
Never. I mean, we've had a civil war in which part of the country tried to secede from the nation, but that wasn't because they rejected the outcome of the election. It was because they didn't like the outcome of the election. And we've had contested elections in that they have been determined by the House of Representatives, where there hasn't been any one candidate who got the requisite number, and there have been people who have been unhappy about that. But we've never had a major party candidate, we've never had a president reject the outcome of an election. And to do so is to reject democracy, because the very basic tenet of a democracy is that the people select their leaders. And so if you reject the people's choice, and you are rejecting the power of the people and therefore rejecting democracy. So that sounds like an extreme way of explaining it, but it's really important when we think about it's not just Donald Trump, causing a ruckus. It's not just trying to get attention. It's not just asking questions. It is rejecting democracy.
And I mean, I guess when you mentioned the word unprecedented has almost lost its significance. Obviously, I'm sure a lot of people would feel that way. And given how unprecedented this is, to use that word again, it's hard to, I guess, look at history as for potential indicators of what could happen next. So I guess when looking at what could potentially happen next, is there any indicators that could, I guess, suggest that? And what are you expecting on this front, given that, Donald Trump has refused to accept the election results at basically every possible time and opportunity he gets?
Well, I think there are two things we want to look at. The first is from our own history, moments where we have had, while not this type of threat to democracy, we have had moments of intense partisan strife. We have had moments of political violence. And the way we have come out of those is by embracing relatively moderate reform, by doubling down on democracy reform, by doubling down on both a commitment by the leaders and by the people to democracy and democratic institutions. The other part that we should look at is what has happened in other nations, because they have had leaders that have acted this way, who have been indicted, who have rejected the outcome of elections. And so I think one potential note of optimism is in other countries where a leader has been removed from power through the power of the elections or through the power of the people, and then have been indicted, if it's just one indictment, that can often be dismissed as a political charge. But as indictments and charges start to stack up, it becomes very difficult to deny the overwhelming power of that evidence. And the best way long-term to defeat an autocrat or a leader who is trying to seize or maintain power through force is to hold them accountable under the law, because it demonstrates that they are just like anyone else, and it removes some of the shiny aura about them. And so I think that if we can do those things, double down on the importance of democracy and democracy reform, and continue to hold people accountable as a nation of laws, then we will actually potentially come out of it stronger.
Okay, that is going to do it for the program tonight. And I really want to stress that a lot of people have different perspectives on this issue. Most certainly, it is not something that is, easy even for the vast majority of people involved. And for the American people, the people who I have been speaking with over the past little while, even Democrats, don't want this moment to be celebrated, so to speak. I mean, you have a former president who is being indicted. That is a dark thing for democracy. There are, however, a lot of people who are happy. They are happy that the former president is now facing some repercussions for his what he's previously done, for his actions. So there are a lot of different perspectives on this issue, all of which are perspectives that I will and that I will continue to cover here on the program. You can expect another full show similar to this coming up on the program tomorrow evening. So make sure to stay with us for extensive analysis and coverage of this. Thanks so much for watching.